Welcome back to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast. We believe that discipleship should not be difficult, so we're here to help you connect the dots between church and home. Together, let's guide each generation, whether related to you or not, to stand confident in their faith. I'm your host, Ron Hunter, and with me as always is my co-host, Mary Ann Howard.
Okay, so something that you've challenged our marketing team with recently is something we've never really talked about on the air, so I thought it would set this interview up really well. And so Ron, one of the things that you challenged us with recently is that you said the best experience is evaluated experience. Like, that's the way we learn best, is when we evaluate experience. I would love for you to tell our audience kind of what you mean by that and how ministries could practice that.
Very good. Well, this is kind of an overflow of two things, the military and John Maxwell. So I want to give credit to John Maxwell. He said, experience isn't the best lesson, evaluated experience is. And I do think it's probably my favorite quote of John Maxwell. And in the military, we couldn't do anything without having an after-action review, meaning we would pause and think through what went well, what didn't go so well, what do we need to change next time we do it. And so that idea of self-reflection, which is different than a selfie elevates self. I'm talking about, let's look at a self-reflection and teach our kids, our classes, our small groups, how to self-evaluate and take an honest, deep perspective look and go, that's not what I thought the world was seeing. I'm seeing something totally different there. And so that's the approach. And I think it can be very redeeming for us. It's kind of like yours and my conversation on a previous episode about diversity with Timothy Paul Jones. How does the rest of the world see the United States? How can we see ourselves through a cultural experience that we've never yet experienced or looked at ourselves before? That's self-evaluation. How about you, Mary Ann? What do you take from that idea when we talked about it as a team, the self-evaluation? What was the aha moment there for you?
Oh yes, it makes me a better leader, and it helps me not just get tunnel vision in my leadership. I think that's something that can be very dangerous, is we want to get our deadlines done. We want to get our projects done. We want to see our things completed. And just like you said, that's very selfie-centered, for lack of a better word, but really evaluated experience when you're working in the model of team helps us see big picture leadership, that your project is my project. You seeing your project across the finish line is also a win for me, because it's more collaborative and it welcomes every perspective at the table. God is doing a work in everybody in your team around the table, and He has a perspective through each individual sitting at the table. And so let's listen to this clip really quick and hear what our friend Linc Taylor has to say about that.
Do we believe that kids are having conversations outside the classroom? They're like, yes. What if we guided them toward biblical discussions, even in the mess of it?
As you listen to this interview, I want you to go ahead and think about, he's going to step on some toes, and I would love for you just to go ahead and start thinking about, what are some of the sacred cows in your ministry? What are some things that you've just always done? And is it worth evaluating? Let's listen to what Linc has to say and maybe walk away with some strong evaluated experience.
Are you feeling overwhelmed as a parent or burnt out in ministry? You're not alone, and you don't have to stay there. D6 Conference 2026 is coming to Nashville and Seattle to offer fresh hope and practical help for every season of life. Whether you're navigating parenting, leading in ministry, or just trying to stay afloat, you're going to hear from leading experts in discipleship, marriage, leadership, parenting, children's ministry, student ministry, and more. Walk away with practical tools, renewed purpose, and spiritual rest you've been craving. To learn more, visit d6conference.com or click the link in the description below.
We're live from the D6 conference in Orlando, Florida with Linc Taylor. Linc serves at Brentwood Baptist in Brentwood, Tennessee as the minister to Next Gen and families. He has 32 years of ministry experience. He received his D.Min from SEBTS in Leadership and Family Ministry. He's authored a new parenting book, The Mystery of the Ordinary, 8 Statements Your Kids Need to Hear from You, and Why. Married for 34 years, he and Joellen have 3 married daughters and 3 grandchildren. He loves encouraging families in the church. He's spoken nationally and internationally in areas of family and marriage. Linc, so good to have you today.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, looking forward to this conversation, because I think there are a lot of churches who can get into a rut, like the same things all the time, doing things that they've always done just because they've always done them. Doesn't that make sense, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Would you say that is like effective today? Like to just keep doing things because we've always done them?
Well, it depends on the church and the programming that's being done to really look at the effectiveness of it. But I think what we've got to do as church leaders and church staff, we've got to address the methods, because many times we just keep doing the things because we've always done them. Mm-hmm. We really kind of lost the why we do things, maybe a long time ago. We keep adding things on. We give new sparkly things to our programming, whatever that might be, whatever method that might be, whether it's groups or any kind of gathering, curriculum, anything we do in programming. But I think it's really wise, and this is something, a passion of mine, probably the last 10 years, is we've got to stop along the way and figuring out why we do what we do. Mm-hmm. It seems so simple, but we've got to get back to what are our values that are guiding our methods, mm-hmm. and even before our values, we've got to get back to what God's Word says. And to cascade effectively. And I think when you look at theology, let's make sure our theology is right. That's not going to change. Our values that come from theology need to be consistently sharpened. Maybe the language of it is sharpened. But our methods need to consistently be changed, and not for change's sake, but for the effectiveness of it. And my granddad used to always use this illustration about like cutting balusters for for railings and all that. Like you need to cut 30 of the same length, and instead of cutting one and then using the one you just cut to measure the next one, and it keeps getting further and further away from the actual measurement from the standard, the very first one. You need to use only one to measure all the other ones, because the further you get away from the standard, the further distance you are, especially when it comes to methods, really to why you were doing what you were doing. Mm-hmm. And I think that illustration is spot on when it comes to methods, whether it's how we do Sunday school. Is it good that we're just having students just come sit in a chair and hear about the greatest truths of all? I mean, it's just good to stop and think. So yeah, that's just kind of general. And when we look at that, as far as what churches do, that's going to be up to them. But I think we've got to know our values, mm-hmm. because from that comes our methods.
Now, a word that you said a couple of times is effectiveness. And so that begs the question, how do we measure effectiveness for the things that we're doing? Well,
sure. I mean, many of us, it's the scorecard through the ages is how many show up, mm-hmm. maybe how many decisions that were made for Christ. But usually it's just numbers, mm-hmm. or budget, for a church. But there's so much more to it. When you're dealing with individuals, when you're dealing with children or students or parents, you've got to develop a different scorecard. Now, that could look different, and it's so hard to capture when you're talking about somebody's life change. Mm-hmm. It's so hard to capture, and we talk about the mystery of the gospel, the mystery of God working. It's very hard to capture that. But I think what we got to look at is the measurement, not of the end results of numbers, but like what are we doing going into it. And that kind of speaks to methods a little bit, but like how are we training new leaders? How are we training our kids to have gospel conversations. How are we training our parents to have gospel conversations? And then stories that we're hearing back. And once again, we have to think differently. It's a paradigm shift when it comes to the scorecard we might be using. Yeah, numbers are not bad, but they cannot be the only thing. I was a student minister for 25 years, and I've had pastors that measured my effectiveness 100% by how many I had in Sunday school compared to a year ago. And that was it.
Yeah.
And that's all I could, that's the only thing I could use. And I knew that wasn't right. But that's a lot of churches is how many did you have this year compared to last year? Or how many did you have this Wednesday night compared to last Wednesday? Or a camp versus, numbers. But if you look at life change, life story change, that's going to you're really digging into effectiveness. Parents' engagement with their kids. You want to have an avenue back that parents are sharing stories with you. Even not just the stories where the bow is tied up and it's all pretty, but it's the parents doing the hard things and talking to you about it, maybe a staff member or leadership. That's where we're getting into effectiveness. Yes, making decisions are huge for Christ, and you're looking at those numbers. But I think it's the scorecard. We got to measure what are we doing in order to train, to equip, students, children, parents, and leaders, and that needs to be kind of what we would call kind of the leading indicators, the leading effectiveness thing. And on the back end, yeah, that's still important of how many may have showed up, but you're also including stories, that are a part of that.
Yeah, impact really.
Absolutely.
Sounds like what it boils down to.
Because you, if you're in a church for a while and you know stories, you're not going to share every story you're hearing. Some stories and life change of a parent, it's just maybe between you guys. But as you do life with people, that's, you see these distinctives that are kind of starting to pop out in a parent's life with the hallmarks of a parent that understands the role in leading their children toward the Lord. And it's hard work. It can't be simply this is what we do. This is the one way we measure, because it only looks at one angle, and you're missing so much in that.
Yeah.
So it's a hard question. I think a lot of churches are trying to figure out what could the scorecard be, and some of the things I just shared, I think, are some of the leading elements to how we're measuring effectiveness.
Yeah, great conversation we're having with Linc Taylor. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Are you ready for the families in your church to shift from a culture of passivity to a culture of intentional faith at home? Getting parents to take their role as the primary disciple makers of their children can feel impossible, but D6 Home Point is here to help. The D6 Home Point Church Resource Center provides practical, relevant tools for families at every life stage, making intentionality a breeze. Our customizable resource center is easy to use and flexible for churches of any size. Ready for the families in your church to start taking at-home discipleship seriously? Use D6 Home Point. To learn more, visit d6homepoint.com or follow the link in the description.
All right, and more from Linc. So, Linc, it sounds like everything that a church does, methods, programming, needs to be on the threshing floor and be willing to give up for the sake of the effectiveness of the gospel. Am I right in saying that?
Absolutely.
Is that like top to bottom, though? Or is it like, only pick and choose these things to be willing to sacrifice?
Well, you're dealing with sacred cows in a sense. You're dealing with major traditions. I just look back at my years in ministry. I mean, even carpet colors to actual carpet to pews to chairs. I mean, some of these things that seem like what? But those are people that have been in the church. It's just the traditions are so strong. When to have groups, how to have groups, especially when you start moving toward equipping parents instead of just parents coming together. It looks totally different. Instead of just having all this these beautiful devotionals maybe, and they're not bad in itself, but now you're moving toward the equipping model where you're helping parents understand how to study the scripture differently. So even curriculum might be changing, or you're moving students now toward, on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night, they're facilitating their peers in application study, after they've been taught maybe a master teacher, even in that. And so when you're changing a Sunday school model this is just one example. You're changing a Sunday school model and this is me 15 years ago, from parents teaching kids who are sitting in chairs, and then they come sit in a chair and then they go home. They come sit in a chair and go home. And I said, there's something not right with this, because these kids are leading out in their schools in plays, in production, and the tech teams, and leading out in so much, yet they come and sit and then they leave. How do we flip the whole paradigm shift at now equipping kids? So we train kids, and now kids are having discussions. Kids are leading other kids in discussions on Sunday mornings. Well, that messed with a lot of parents and messed with a lot of leaders, because, wait, what are you doing, Linc? For decades we've done it one way. And I said, we've got to change. Do we believe that kids are having conversations outside the classroom? They're like, yes. What if we guided them toward biblical discussions, even in the mess of it? What if we did that? Now, that's just one example of let's change the methods.
Yeah, excellent.
And it's, people at first go, whoa, wait a second. We've always done it this way. And that's a phrase I've heard so many times. Or when I used to serve in smaller churches, Linc, we're a small church, we can't do that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even a financial thing. It was just the shift that we needed to make. And so, yeah.
Well, you brought up sacred cows earlier, and I mean, some church leaders might not want to admit that there are sacred cows in their congregations and their churches and things, but if you really think about it, they probably are. And we've all been a part of churches that, they are known for doing this annually, or whatever it might be. And while some traditions like that can be great, others might take away from what we as the Big C church, global church, are trying to accomplish. And then, as we're analyzing and having on the threshing floor, making the decisions as to, what is actually effective and what is not. Can you speak to the leader who's on the front side of that, who's like, I'm thinking about starting this. How can it not become a sacred cow? Is there like a time frame? Oh, you should try this only for a little bit.
As far as the trajectory you're setting.
Yeah, because I don't want to start something that will then become a sacred cow in the future that's not effective. How do you coach that leader, I guess, right now on the front end?
Yeah, and I think there's some good things. You have to put goals in place. It can't just be endless. But there's so much in answering that, because it depends on really what they would be doing. But like when I made that move and led our team years ago to make that move, I was going to give it about 2 years.
Okay.
And let's see what happens. A lot of people were watching. Yeah. And so they weren't. Maybe some people weren't telling me they were watching, but there were a lot of people watching. A lot of, so I think you're going to need to put some measurements that are in there. Understanding, anytime you change, even if it's a brand new ministry. Well, one is you're dealing with time and resources that the church has. The resources of the church are limited. The time is limited. And then you deal with family. You're dealing with families. Time is limited. Resources are limited. So you're starting with that. And then you bring in something that's a change, whether it's a whole shift of a program or it's something totally new. All of a sudden a Tuesday night service or a Saturday morning serve day you're going to do once a month or whatever it may be. There's a change involved. And so anytime change comes, you're going to have to weather a little bit of that storm. You're going to have to, in a sense, be willing to go backwards in order to move forwards.
Okay.
And I think a lot of time you've got to have clear vision, very clear vision written out, and it's always good to have some people beforehand to speak to be willing to say, okay, this is where we're going. These are the costs we're willing to take. Not the loss of hopefully members,
Sure.
I'm not, but just, maybe monetary costs, but also cost of people asking questions, people maybe doubting, and so there's all kinds of cost in that. But I think, it depends on what it would be, of how long, but you've got to have measurements. You got to have a set goal, you got to have measurements, and then you got to have the cost that you're willing to take to know when they do come, you're like, oh, there it is. We were ready for this, and you got to have answers ready for that.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking through just that one thing, just that one of many things that I shifted in our student ministry years ago was from a beautiful, well-known model that everybody loves, and I just shook it up because I was like, we've got to do something different to prepare our kids for what's next. And that was the big thing. And there were a lot of people on board and a lot of people that weren't, and then a lot of people that eventually got on board because they began to see kids that were graduating were now knowing they knew how to lead a small group in college in their dorm room. And I was like, that's stories. So that's a scorecard. That's a story.
That's awesome. Well, Linc, thanks so much for your time, and thanks for being a partner with us here at D6.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Linc just covers such a broad gambit of items, and it's because of his experience and yet his practical areas. His mind runs here, it runs there. Sometimes you're like, oh, you're just catching up to what he said, and then he changes to a different path. And it's because he really, truly wants to coach us up. He wants us to help that self-evaluation, slaughter the sacred cows, so to speak. And he truly does want to make a difference in how teachers and students deal with the gospel. And I'm thankful for that perspective.
Yeah, I really loved that he challenged us to think about who are the parents, students, or leaders around you who are beginning to show the fruit of changed lives. Those are the ones you want to talk to. Those are the ones you want evaluating what's happening in your ministry. And then you take those stories of what God's doing in the lives of those parents and those students in your ministry, and you celebrate and you multiply them. There is nothing more powerful than sharing stories of changed lives. That is wildfire revival that can happen inside of ministries when we start allowing that to happen. And so let me just ask this question, audience, as you're thinking about your week and thinking about processing this podcast interview. Are there any sacred cows in your ministry that might be hindering effectiveness or innovation? And what's one next step to address it? That's how we want to leave you this week. Thank you so much for listening. Next week, we are going to have Emily Snyder, and she is going to talk to us about the state of your nursery. We're talking babies and toddlers, and you're not going to want to miss it. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please consider subscribing or leaving a 5-star review. That always helps us out. To learn more, visit d6family.com. We look forward to seeing you next week.